Hey, this is Kip, and in this video series, we're going to learn how to fly the Pilatus PC-12 in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. This is part one, where we're going to do an entire career mode mission using a visual approach. Let's do our pre-flight walk around, as we do in most planes, just by removing the pitot tube cover, the chocks, and then in this case, we have an engine cover to remove right here as well. The door on the left side of the PC-12 isn't functional right now, so it looks like the only way to get in is just by using the shortcut here in the top right, Shift-C, to enter the aircraft. To start up the plane, we're going to hit Shift-5 on keyboard if you have one. That'll take us up here to the overhead panel. And I'm going to do this in an unrealistic way, but a way that will work. So all we're going to do is turn on the AV1 bus, the standby bus, AV2 bus. Make sure both the generators are on. Generator 2 is already on. We're going to turn the EPS or emergency power system to the arm position. Then we're going to turn on both the batteries. And now since we have electrical power and we're going to start the engine, I'm going to turn the nav light and the beacon light on. And now I'm just going to click the run switch and then press the starter button. So if we look down here at the PFD using Shift 1, we can see the engine starting up. If we look at our three primary engine information gauges right here, our torque, our interstage turbine temperature, and our gas generator rotation speed percentage, we can see they're all here in the green and idling pretty low since we're just sitting here at parking. While we're flying this plane, we're simply going to keep all three of these gauges in the green. During takeoff, we'll have it go into the yellow momentarily. We can do that just for a couple minutes, but shortly after takeoff, we'll dial them back into the green. Now let's take a look at the PFD here. These avionics are the Honeywell Primus avionics, and the specific version that's installed in this plane is called the Epic 2.0. These avionics are not touchscreen in the real world. You instead use all of these buttons lining the left and right side of the display. But for our convenience, they were made into touchscreens or click screens here in the sim by the developers, just so it's easier to use them. If we look at the MFD with Shift 2, this is even more obvious as we point to sections like this and click these little tabs and buttons. These don't have any hardware button on the side to control them, and so they were made into a touchscreen. How the real pilots use this is there's a little trackball down here. They rest their hand over this and use a little trackball, a thumb button, and a little finger mouse scroll wheel button to use a small cursor that moves around on the screen, just like our mouse cursor does with our actual mouse in the sim. Now let's go back to the PFD real quick, the primary flight display, by hitting Shift 1 and configure this. Most people are used to having synthetic vision on their Garmins if you've used those in the simulator. We can do the same here on the Epic by clicking the little overlay button here, either on the touchscreen or the hardware button. And this brings up some of our options here for the PFD. The first one is SVS, Synthetic Vision System. So all you have to do is click on that to turn on synthetic vision. There's also some other options here to show a weather radar, to show terrain awareness and warning system, so it'll highlight dangerous terrain around you. And if you use either one of those modes, you can use the range knob over here. The outer part of this knob where it says course and range will change the range. You can see the miles right down here. And since we're here, I'm going to go ahead and set my altimeter automatically by hitting the comma button on my keyboard. So it is 29er. If you don't have a keyboard, you can bind a setting to the Set Altimeter shortcut in your settings to hit that and change the altimeter automatically. Speaking of the altimeter setting, there is a way to change it between inches of mercury and hectopascals, mattering where you're flying in the world. You can do that by coming down here. This is the lower MFD, and you can get to this and the touchscreen controller down here by hitting Shift 3 if you have a keyboard. What we're going to do is hit this second button down here that says DU and CCD. And this next part is a labeling issue, but we're going to click on upper MFD. This should really be the lower MFD, but these are just swapped. So we'll hit upper MFD and then hit this page button right here on the right. Now up here we have a little menu revealed that says checklist, sensors, weather and TAWs, and avionics. You can explore this to find a bunch of different settings, but the one we're interested in is under avionics. And this is where we can change this first one right here from inches of mercury to hectopascals. So if I click on this, it'll change to HPA, and that'll be reflected over here on the PFD. To turn this menu off and get back to the checklist, just go down here and hit the page button again while it's selected on upper MFD, and then click on the checklist button right here. If you don't like that the HSI only covers about 120 degrees and you'd rather have a 360 degree view, you can click on this HSI button here in the top right. When you do it though, you'll see that we lose the weather map or the terrain awareness map, but it does remember our settings. So if we click HSI again, it'll go back and show the previous configuration for what overlay we had turned on here. I'm back over here on the MFD or multifunction display where we can see our flight plan and our map. I'm going to go up here to the top toolbar and click this little tablet button to open our EFB or electronic flight bag. Since I'm doing a career mode mission, our flight plan is already here in the tablet, so we can just transfer it over to our avionics by clicking the send route to avionics button. If I do that, it'll bring in all of the waypoints, and all I have to do is then click activate. Now we'll just quickly review our flight plan by zooming out. We do that just by clicking this little range button right here and then moving our mouse up or down to zoom in and out. If you want to change which waypoint the map is centered on, you can go ahead and click the skip waypoint button up here in the top right. That'll move forward to the next waypoint in the flight plan, and you can zoom in as you're doing this to see things in more detail. So if you have a complex approach or something, this is really helpful. If you want to go backwards one waypoint, you can just click recall waypoint. And then if you want to go all the way back to your plane, you can click on the center AC button. That'll make sure your plane is centered on the map. If you want the current waypoint centered to the center of the screen, you can click the center to waypoint button. And then you'll see your plane approaching that waypoint while it stays centered. And then as soon as we reach that waypoint, it'll move to center the next waypoint. There are also a series of menus up here at the top you can go through to turn on things like VOR, waypoints, intersections. You can turn off the airport codes of nearby airports if you don't want to see them. The terrain menu at the top lets you either turn off the terrain completely so you can focus on your flight plan, or the situational awareness terrain mode that will highlight any terrain that's a threat to us based on our altitude and the known elevation of that terrain. And then under the weather menu, you may want to turn on the NEXRAD weather to show you the satellite data for weather in the area. We're not seeing anything near us right now. Next, let's take a look at our flight plan and how to interact with this. First of all, you can scroll this by clicking and dragging with your mouse. I would recommend using the right section here, these larger boxes, when you're clicking and dragging, because if you do it on the left, it'll actually interact with a waypoint. We won't go over all the options here right now, but if you do need to use direct to during your flight, all you have to do is click on a waypoint and then hit the direct to button and then click activate, and that will change your current active waypoint. Next, we're going to set our cruising altitude by going to the altitude and speed tab right here. And right here, you can see that it has our cruise altitude set at flight level 200, which is 20,000 feet. I'm going to go back up to our EFB and see what our planned cruising altitude is. And it's flight level 290, which is 29,000 feet. There's a bug in the PC-12 as I'm recording this video that makes it so the pressurization system does not work. If you fly this plane in career mode, your mission will fail after 10 minutes or so when you're cruising at a high altitude because there's no pressurization, no oxygen for the passengers, and it just says mission failed. So to avoid that in career mode until Sim Update 2 fixes the bug, you'll want to cruise at about 17,000 feet to be safe. Some people say they've gotten up to like 18 or 19,000, but I would recommend 17,000 just to be safe. It's up to you if you want to push it. So I'm going to go ahead and change my cruising altitude here from flight level 290 to 170. So that'll be 17,000 feet. And then I'm going to tell ATC about that change by scrolling down and clicking the File Plan with ATC button. Now the mission system and the ATC should know that I'm only going to cruise at 17,000 feet for this mission. Once this bug is fixed in Sim Update 2, you can just use whatever cruise altitude is here or whatever cruise altitude ATC assigns you. So let's set our cruise altitude to 17,000 in my case by clicking right here. You'll see when I click it, it turns white. And then down here, there's a little keyboard that gets activated. Now, don't worry, you don't have to use this because there is a keyboard entry mode. To get to the keyboard entry mode, it's this little tiny mini keyboard icon here near where it says fuel and weight. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and you'll see it turn white. And it will actually remember this setting between the times you fly the plane. So you should only have to click this particular button right here once. Now when I click cruise altitude, you'll see it highlight in magenta, letting me know that I can type with my keyboard. So I'll just type in 17,000, or you can type whatever your cruise altitude is. And then you can either click somewhere else over here, or you can hit enter on your keyboard, and that will accept that 17,000 cruise altitude. By setting the cruise altitude, the avionics will be able to calculate a top of climb marker for us and show it on the map to let us know at which point along our route will we reach our top of climb. And even though it's not implemented yet, I'm pretty sure that the pressurization system is going to use this as well. Next, let's click on the little departure button right here, the little icon of the plane taking off. Here we can set our departure runway, and if we had a departure procedure, that would be shown here. I don't happen to have one. You can change the runway and the departure procedure by clicking the button right here. And below this, we can see our reference speeds for our rotation speed and our best rate of climb speed. So we're going to rotate at 82 knots, and VY is our best rate of climb. So we're going to pitch to climb at 130 knots. And if I want to send these over to our PFD over here and have them show up at the bottom of the speed tape, I can do that just by clicking the send button. And now we can see those speeds over here at the bottom of our airspeed indicator on the PFD. And these numbers will also show up as little bugs here as we increase our speed. You'll see them come down and be pinned to that speed on the side for our reference. Finally, if we click the last button right here of the plane landing, this is where all of our arrival, approach, and landing information is. So you can see we're expected to land on runway 14. There is no approach selected yet, and we have no arrival procedure. But if you did, those things would be here, and you would hit this button to change them. All right, let's open up our mission steps now and get to taxiing. In the mission steps now, it looks like I accidentally hit return, and that triggered the taxi prompt. So it already did the taxi instructions. So now it's just telling me to go ahead and release the parking brake and stop at the hold short over here. The parking brake in this plane is located right down here, or you can use a shortcut. And I will warn you, you're going to want to hold your brakes down as you hit the parking brake, because of what's going to happen as soon as you click the parking brake, the plane is going to start moving forward. So I'm going to hit my normal brakes to stop myself. Because this plane has a really high idle speed on the ground, as soon as we let go of our brakes, we're going to start rolling forward without doing anything. If you look down at your power lever, you'll notice that there is a reverse section right here. And you can go into your settings and look up the throttle reverse settings. I use one called hold throttle reverse. There's another one called toggle throttle reverse. Or if you happen to use buttons like on an Xbox controller or any button that just decreases the throttle, if you hold decrease throttle, it will pull it back into this reverser section. But the way to taxi this plane without riding your brakes is by pulling it back slightly into this reverser section. I actually don't use this reverser section myself when I'm flying this plane just because it's not very precise. You can see how it jumps really quickly from the idle detent back here, like a little further into ground, like more than I want it to. And I'll end up just stopping, even just pulling it into this first little section of the reverser range. So for me, I don't really care to use it on the ground. You can try it and see if you like it, but for now, I just ride my brakes. So let's just let go of our brakes. Maybe use them just a little bit to slow down as we make this turn and get over to the hold short point. Now that I'm holding short, I'm going to set up my autopilot. Normally we would do this before we start taxiing, but in case somebody skipped ahead using the skip to taxi, skip to takeoff buttons, you'll want to do this before taking off. I'm going to hit Shift 6 to take a look at the autopilot, which is located right here above the MFD. I'm going to go ahead and turn the altitude knob to set our cruise altitude up to 17,000 feet. Now, ATC may give us a lower altitude, and if they do, I'll update that to listen to their instructions. But for now, I'll just move it up to 17,000, which is my cruise altitude. All right, now over here, we can see 17,000 is set. Next, I'm going to hit the FLC, or Flight Level Change button, and this is going to turn on Flight Level Change mode here on our PFD, and you can see a target airspeed of 130 knots. That's in there automatically based on our VY speed that we looked at earlier in the avionics. If you want to manually change this speed, you'll use the speed knob right here at the top center of the autopilot. This is in FMS mode by default, which means Flight Management System. So the avionics is determining what speed is selected. If you click on that, it'll change it to manual mode, and then you can use this knob to change the selected airspeed. Below the speed selection knob, we can see the AT button, which is auto throttle. We're not going to use that until we get up to about 10,000 feet during our climb, because if you use this early in your initial climb, it tends to use too much power and bring our temperatures and our torque into the red, which we want to avoid. If we hit Shift 3 and look down here at the lower MFD, we can see our trim and our flaps need to be set for takeoff. So I'm going to hit flaps down to the 15-degree position. And then for trim, I like to use the maximum nose up trim that's possible. So I'm going to use my elevator or pitch trim shortcut and pull it to nose up until it turns red. And then I'm going to put the nose down with elevator trim down until it turns green again. So there we have the maximum allowed nose up pitch trim setting for takeoff. You may notice over here that we also have checklists. So once you get used to flying this plane a few, if you want to use these abbreviated checklists, they're really nice. You can just click them, click something like before takeoff. So we've gone ahead and set our flaps. Flight controls, free and correct. I can go ahead and check those real quick. Look at my ailerons, elevator, and rudder. Everything looks good. So I'll click to check that off. The next checklist item says Inert Sep. That's Inertial Separator, which is this button right over here. I'm going to click open, and then we're going to check that. The Inertial Separator prevents our engine from ingesting any foreign object debris. So like dust and dirt and rocks and anything else like that, even ice when we're in cruise in icing conditions. And we turn that on for takeoff and landing, and also turn it on if we're entering any icing conditions in cruise. So we'll leave that on. Next, it says to get our landing and strobe lights on. So I'm going to hit Shift 5 and go up here to our lights. So I'll turn on our strobe light, turn off the taxi light, turn on the landing light. And if we look at our lights, you can see that the landing lights are actually here on the main landing gear on the left and right. And then this light right here in the front is our taxi light. So once our gear is up, none of those three lights are visible. And that leaves us with our recognition lights, which are under the wings of the plane. So if we turn this last light switch right here to the center position, you can see these recognition lights right here are on and steady. And if we want, we can turn them to the pulse position here, so they'll be pulsing on and off like this. Since that checklist is complete, I'm just going to click right here, and then we'll click the after takeoff checklist. We're all ready for takeoff, so I'm going to hit enter to announce our takeoff. We got our parking brake off, and we'll enter runway 17. This is one of many missions that makes you back taxi for your departure runway, but this thing has a really good turning radius, as you can see. All right, we're here on the displaced threshold portion of the runway. So with the white arrows here, this means we can use this for takeoff. Now that we're all lined up with the runway, I'm going to sync my autopilot's heading bug straight ahead. I'm going to right click here where it says heading, and that will move our heading bug and set our current heading for the autopilot directly straight ahead because we're going to fly runway heading to start. Now I'm going to click on the heading button right here to activate heading mode. And if you happen to have a departure procedure, or when you take off, it looks like you're just going to fly right onto course, you can just hit the nav mode in advance, and that'll just pretty much be activated right away or right shortly after you take off, so you don't have to worry about it. But for me, you can see that I have to turn all the way around and go back to where the green line is here representing the first leg of our course, and we'll do that once we take off. But to start, we're going to take off and fly runway heading. So just to confirm our autopilot settings, I have heading mode active with the heading bug straight ahead to fly runway heading to start. Flight level change mode is going to take us up to 17,000 feet eventually. And over here, the airspeed is chosen by the FMS, and it's set to 130 knots, which is our VY speed. So to take off, we're just going to give it full throttle, and we're going to wait for 82 knots, which is our rotation speed when we're using the first notch of flaps, which is 15. If you want to rotate and get airborne sooner, you could use 30 degrees of flaps, and then your rotation speed will drop to about 76 knots instead. But we're going to do a takeoff with flaps 15 and 82 as our rotation speed. So I'm going to go ahead and let go of the parking brake, give it full throttle all the way up to the full toga position, the takeoff position. And we're going to look down at our airspeed indicator, looking for 82 knots. And getting ready to put our gear up once we get airborne. So I got my finger on my gear up button as well. There's 80 knots, 82 knots. And it requires quite a bit of pressure to get it going. All right, we have a positive rate of climb. I'm gonna go ahead and hit gear up. And we're pitching up. We don't want to be above 10 degrees on the pitch up. You can see we're trying to speed up here. And just following the flight director, just pointing at this magenta bird right here. All right, if we look right here below that, we can see 408. This is our height above the ground. So we're over 500 feet above the ground already. We're over 100 knots, so I'm going to get our flaps up. And then I'm going to get our yaw damper on. You can use a shortcut or you can go over here and click the YD button. And now we can see that the yaw damper is on right here. Now I'm going to continue following the flight director by pitching up and aiming at the magenta bird right here. You can see that our ITT is in the yellow. So I'm going to pull my throttle back until that yellow goes away. You can see it decreasing now. Okay, now I'll add a little more power. I'm just trying to keep it at the top of the green here while we take off. And now I'm going to hit the autopilot on button. You can either hit a shortcut or click the button over here. And we still need to manage our speed. Now, I don't have any more steps here. It's probably because I switched the cruise altitude and filed the flight plan. So all it says is fly to our destination airport. You probably need to hit a button here to start talking to ATC already. But for me, we're just good to go and continue to the airport. So now that I am climbing a little higher, we're going to keep adding a little bit of power. And remember our after takeoff checklist. So we got the landing gear up, yaw damper is on, inertial separator right here can come off. Unless you're flying through extremely cold conditions with moisture in the air through clouds, rain, snow, and the outside air temperature is below 10 degrees Celsius. In that case, you'll want to keep the inertial separator on, but in cases like this, we're not flying through any clouds or anything, and it's warmer out, turn the inertial separator off. And the flaps are indicated up already. I'm going to check that. And then we can go up and get the landing and the taxi lights off because they don't do anything since they're in the landing gear, and that is stowed. Now I'm going to change my recognition light back to just the regular recognition mode, just so it's a steady light. All right, so since I took off and we're going the wrong direction, I'm going south and our course is up here. Just like with other autopilots, we need to turn ourselves to get close to this course before we can use navigation mode and let it automatically follow the route from waypoint to waypoint. So all I'm going to do is go over here, look at my HSI, and I can see that I just need to turn the heading bug around towards the blue arrow. So all I'm going to do is go up here, grab the heading bug, and turn myself around to the left. And keep turning it. We're watching the magenta bug and number right here. Turning it all the way around towards that arrow. Now the broken side of the line for me is a little bit more towards the west side here. So I'm going to move it a little bit more towards the broken side of the line to intercept that course. And then my nav mode already turned on as I was making that turn. So once you get close enough to your desired course right here, your magenta line, nav mode will automatically arm itself. If you're far away from the course, remember, you have to fly towards that magenta line, towards the broken side of the line here on the HSI, until you get close enough for nav mode to arm itself. And as we're climbing higher and higher, we need to keep adding power. So I'm going to keep adding power now. Just keep it up in the top of the green so we can climb as fast as possible. Basically, we just want to look at all three of these gauges here and make sure none of them are in the yellow or especially not in the red. So I can bring the torque up to a little below 40 PSI. And that's a good setting. And this will drop as we get higher and higher, so we need to keep adding throttle. If we look over here on the MFD, I can see it says compare fuel quantity. This just seems to be a timer that's just periodically letting us know to check our fuel. We can see our fuel right here on the left and right tank. Those are even, and we have plenty of fuel. It's showing that we have 1,200 pounds. We're burning 500 pounds an hour. And at our current power settings, that'll give us 2 hours and 24 minutes of fuel endurance. So I'll go ahead up here and just clear this message by hitting the little message clear button right here on the right. All right, I'm already up at our cruise altitude of only 17,000 feet. You know, in the future, if you're watching this after Sim Update 2, you'll be able to climb as high as 30,000 feet in this plane because it is pressurized. So once you're at cruise, what you can do is go down here. Optionally, you can click on this little prop low speed button. This will have almost no effect on your airspeed, but it will turn the prop into a low RPM mode, taking it down about 150 RPMs lower than it currently is, and that'll reduce the amount of noise that it makes. So I'll go ahead and click this. We'll see in the CAS messages in a second, it'll say prop low speed. And we can listen to the prop slowly wind down to a slower speed. Now over here we can see prop low speed is shown. We can see that our prop speed has dropped to 1550 now instead of around 1700. Now that we're in cruise, let's go ahead and just hit the auto throttle button. I'm going to press AT right here. And if we look over here, we'll see it's trying to reach a target airspeed of Mach 0.47. Now, I don't think it's going to be able to get there because we're only at 17,000 feet. But this is the target airspeed that it has for the auto throttle when you're at your cruise altitude. Before we took off on our MFD, we set that initial cruise altitude. So that's how it knows to use our cruise speed, which is defined right here in both Mach and in knots. The autothrottle works pretty well in cruise and in descent and even on the approach, actually. Sometimes, though, it'll get into a situation where it goes above your target airspeed, then below your target airspeed over and over again. So it's like going fast and then slow, and then fast and then slow over and over. And that gets really annoying. So you may run into that. And in that case, just go ahead and turn the auto throttle off and just set the throttle manually. Remember, all you need to do is just make sure that you're not exceeding the normal operating speeds and temperatures here. So just keep it in the green and you'll be fine. Now let's set up for our descent and our approach. We're going to just click on the landing button right here, and the landing tab should be selected, star and landing. And then right here, this little button that says runway, approach, and star, we'll click that. The airport I'm flying to only has a visual approach available. I can browse the other approaches by clicking the one that's selected to deselect it. And in my case, there's nothing else listed here. For you, you may see things like ILS and RNAV approaches and things like that. If you want to follow along exactly with this video, we should use the visual approach though. This type of approach will be available at every single runway in the entire world in the sim. And if you need to change the runway that's selected, you can click on runway here. But we're going to do 14, the visual, and then we're just going to choose this option called straight. Choosing straight will generate a new waypoint for us. So I'm going to go ahead and hit insert. And we can preview the approach by zooming the map in and then hitting the skip waypoint button a bunch to get towards the end of our route here. And now we can see a preview of what changes are going to be made in teal. So all I have to do is hit activate. And you'll see it's added this waypoint called RX14. And that is going to get us turned around and lined up with the approach course here for runway 14. So this is basically an extended center line for runway 14. So we're going to fly up this way, turn around, and land on 14. But you'll notice that it's not connected to the rest of the flight plan, and this will happen pretty often when you add an approach. This is called the discontinuity. It's a disconnection between the flight plan. So if we scroll down here by clicking and dragging, we can find that discontinuity, and all we have to do is click on it and then click delete waypoint. Now, if we look again, previewed is a line drawn between this waypoint Mars and the RX14 waypoint. And that's exactly what we want. So I'm just going to hit activate. Now that we got rid of the discontinuity, you can see it's generated a TOD or top of descent marker for us. So there's a little asterisk and then TOD right here after Mars. If I scroll down on the flight plan here, you can see the TOD marker in the list of waypoints, but you'll notice that it has no time or distance associated with it. So all we really know is that it's going to be somewhere after Mars and somewhere before RX14. So we can see the time here says 1 hour and 45 minutes till we get to Mars. I guess I picked a really long, I guess this is fitting, you know, an hour. It's taking a really long time to get to Mars. And then after that, we have 2 hours and 4 minutes to get to RX14. That's the waypoint where we're turning around and lining up with the runway. As we get closer to it, I'll usually use this range ring right here to figure out how many miles out the top of descent is. But in this case, it's so far out, we know we have 1 hour and 45 until we get to Mars. So we'll wait until then, and I'll be using some sim rate shortcuts to accelerate this. You can find those if you look up sim rate increase and sim rate decrease in your control settings and bind keys to those two commands. So I'm going to hit sim rate up twice. And then once I get closer, I'll hit sim rate decrease twice to get me back to real time for the descent. All right, I'm getting closer to my top of descent here. We have 6 minutes until we get to Mars, so it's at least another 6 minutes till top of descent after that, so call it like 13, 14 minutes. If you happen to be flying in icing conditions, so you're passing through visible moisture like clouds or rain or snow, and your static air temperature, seen right here on the PFD, is under 10 degrees Celsius, so anything under positive 10, you should go down here to the right side of your yoke and turn on your ice protection systems. We have one for the probe heat on our pitot tubes. We have the ice protection for windshield left and right. It has a light and a heavy. These are actually set to heavy by default when you go in the plane, so it's up to you if you want to just turn them off during the flight. I usually do, because if I see icing on the windows, then I have confirmation of being in icing conditions. And then down here, again, we have the inertial separator to protect the engine while we're going through icing, and then propeller. Then finally, there's the boots. These will inflate and knock off any icing that's accumulated on the leading edge of your wings here, or the stabilizer at the back. And that has two modes, either every 3 minutes, it'll inflate and knock the icing off, or every 1 minute is kind of the fast mode. And we're only a few minutes away, so I'm going to go ahead and check the weather by opening up my tablet, going to my route screen, and finding the destination airport and clicking on the little I button right here. That'll take us to the airport information page. And this is a small airport, so I know I'm not going to get weather. I do not have it. So I'll probably just hit my comma key as I get closer. We'll go ahead and check out the runway as well. We're supposed to be landing at runway 14. I can verify that by going down here, seeing it says runway 14 right here. And also down here on the landing page, it says runway 14. So if I click on 14, we can see the heading of the runway is 144, magnetic heading. The length is 3,300 feet, about 3,400 feet long and 60 feet wide. And the elevation is at 2,261 feet. If we compare that elevation, 2261, to how low it's taking us on the visual approach, we can see that it's taking us down to just 50 feet above the elevation of the runway. So I don't want to go down all the way, like letting the autopilot take us down to just 50 feet over the ground. So I'm going to limit myself to just like kind of a traffic pattern altitude by adding 1,000 to this. So I'm going to round this up to 2,300 and then add 1,000. So we'll use 3,300 for our altitude we're going to descend at all the way down to, and then hopefully I'll have a visual of the airport and the runway by then. So I'm going to take the altitude knob and move this down all the way until we get to 3,200 feet. All right, there is 3,200 feet right here on our selected altitude. And now what we can do, just like if you've used VNav in the Garmin's, since we have a top of descent marker, we have some altitude constraints defined, and we have changed our selected altitude to allow it to go all the way down to 3,200 feet. All we have to do is click on the VNav button right here on the autopilot to arm vertical path mode. We can see that the VNav system is holding our altitude currently, and then VNav is on standby right here. And then that'll activate once we hit our top of descent, and it will precisely take us all the way down, aiming for this altitude right here, 3853 or above when it crosses over this waypoint. And then it'll arrive at 2310 if we let it go down that far at runway 14's waypoint. But I'm just going to let it get us down close enough to a pattern altitude during the turn, and then we should have a visual of the runway by then. It's up to you if you want to let it take you down further, but something to know about these visual approaches, just like in the Garmin's, the visual approaches are just for what it sounds like. It's to do a visual approach. We need to be able to see the airport environment, the runway. We need to see where we're going. This isn't like an ILS or an RNAV approach where we can take it down to 200 feet above the ground, you know, in thick, dense fog. So in this case, we need to be a little more safe and more conservative. So we're going to hold our altitude 1,000 feet above the elevation airport. That's just for me. You can try to take it down lower if you want. You know, it's a sim. You can do what you want, but this is how I like to do it. All right, here comes our top of descent marker here. If I zoom in close, I can see that we're just about 4 miles away from it. So that's in less than a minute at our current speed. Once we hit that, we're going to expect the VNav mode to activate here on the autopilot and start our descent for us. So here comes the top of descent. There is VPath enunciated on our flight mode annunciator, or FMA. That's where our autopilot status is shown. We can see our descent starting at 1,000 feet per minute right now, and our airspeed is increasing. All right, we're less than 10 miles away from our destination here, and I can see that the FMS mode in the autothrottle is changing our speed to 150 knots automatically. It's slowing us down for the approach, and if it doesn't do that, you can go up here and change to manual mode, and then use the knob here to change your speed down to 150 or so. Or you can just turn off the auto throttle with the auto throttle button. I'm going to go ahead and do that now just to simplify things and pull my throttle out. As you slow down, you'll see these speed bugs right here to let us know what speed we have to be under to put our gear out, flaps 15, and then flaps 30 and 40. So ultimately, we want to be below 130 knots. I'm going to go ahead and zoom my map in a little bit here. I'm going to go down and turn our low prop speed mode off. Click on this button. And then over here for our before landing checklist, it says to turn the inertial separator on. And then next we'll put our landing gear down with the taxi and landing lights on. I'm going to go ahead and just hit the landing lights right now. And if I look outside, we can see the waypoint and our runway right over there. This is a pretty tight turn that this visual approach is giving me. So I'll see how it does, but I'm anticipating needing to turn off the autopilot a little bit early because it's such a tight turn. But I am going to pull my throttle down pretty far and try to get really slow so we can make that turn more easily. And there was no weather available here, so I'm just going to hit comma to sync my altimeter setting again. So it's set it to 29080 so we know our altitude is accurate. And vertical path mode is still on. That's going to take us down to 3,200 feet. And with our navigation mode on here, it's going to turn us around to line up with that runway. So we're just going to monitor it, make sure we get pretty slow because this is a tight turn. And I'll get ready to put my gear and flaps down. So we can start with our gear. We saw up on the speed tape that it was under 180 knots. We can put the gear down. And then we're also under our flaps 15 speed right here. So we can safely put flaps 15 out as well. Once we're under 130, we can get flaps 30 and then flaps 40. All right, here comes our right turn. I'm going to go ahead and get our gear down now because this is turning us in pretty close to the airport. You can see we're not coming in from this direction and making a nice 90 degree and a 90 degree turn. It's trying to do one smooth arc all the way around. So I just want to make sure I get my gear down right now. I'm going to get my flaps 15 down as well. And because I don't want it to just continue this right turn for us, I want to make like a 90 degree turn and land. I'm just going to turn off the autopilot right now so I can just fly this like a normal traffic pattern. All right, now I'm cutting the throttle because we are pretty high. I'm going to get flaps 30 and 40 down. And remember, we're aiming for about 100 knots. And then we want to cross the threshold at 85 knots when we pull it to idle. Use my third-person camera here to see this runway because I'm pretty close. Need kind of a sharp turn for this one. So mattering which visual approach you're using, it may be a much better lineup than this. These where it's doing like a 180 degree turn, I tend to want to turn the autopilot off for these, but yours might bring you straight in and you don't need to turn the autopilot off until you get much closer to the runway. All right, so I'm just watching my speed here. I'm a little fast, so I'm going to do what's called a slip. I'm going to use a little bit of left rudder and right ailerons to drop our altitude quickly here. We're definitely coming in very high, but that's fine. We have plenty of runway to work with. Now I'll get out of the slip, add a little bit of power, and now reduce that power. It's going to be a long landing. I definitely should have not done that full turn. All right, I'm just going to use the brakes. There is the possibility of using reverse thrust here to slow down, but the brakes alone are very powerful. In a future video, we'll definitely get into setting up how to use reverse thrust and using it on our next landing. But the brakes in the PC-12 are pretty powerful already, so I find that I usually don't really need the reverse thrust. The reverse thrust is definitely more important if you're using this as an owned plane in career mode, though. Not only can you save on your brakes during the landing, but also during the taxiing like we talked about earlier in the video. All right, so that's an example of when visual approaches can they'll line you up, but when it's that close and that tight of a turn, it's just trying to do a continuous right turn to land, which doesn't work out very well. So the majority of the time, though, the visual approach is going to line you up in a way where you have a lot more time to do that final turn and descend. You'll be more lined up with the runway. But that was a bit of a long landing, but I'm okay with it. We still landed pretty smoothly. And now I'll go over here to the hold short point. While we're doing that, I'm going to go down here and turn our ice protection off. I got our probes off. And we'll wait for the inertial separator. We'll leave that on until we get to the hold short. All right, here we're at the hold short. There we go. Let's turn our parking brake on and check our mission steps again. We're going to announce our taxi to parking. All right, here at the parking stand, let's get the parking brake on. And you can either use the shutdown procedure shortcut up here in the top right, or go down and get to your shutdown checklist. So our parking brake is set. Our flaps are up. Let's turn all the external lights off up here. De-ice systems need to be off, so that includes our inertial separator. Engine master, generator, battery switches, and EPS off. So that's just all the switches up here that we turned on before. So we'll go up here and turn off the engine first. And then just turn off all of these switches, generators, batteries, our emergency power system, the buses, and avionics. And now we should get the mission complete as soon as the prop stops moving. There we go. Now, I didn't have any ATC callouts on this. I had the mission window closed, so I'll probably get dinged for not having a great amount with ATC. Oh, maybe not. All right, I didn't really talk to ATC at all. So yeah, we'll take an S tier rating. Sounds good. All right, that's the first career mode mission I've done in a while. So mission is complete. We got an S tier ranking. And I hope you found this video useful as an introduction to flying the PC-12. I will do some more videos on this with different approaches, and we'll even do one in free flight mode so we can get up closer to our maximum cruising altitude of 30,000 feet. As always, thanks for watching. Leave any questions and comments below, and I'll see you in the next video.